In 1941, German fighter pilots discovered a Soviet aircraft their bullets could not kill. The Ilyushin Il-2 Sturmovik carried steel armor built directly into its airframe, and machine gun fire bounced off the cockpit like gravel. Stalin telegraphed his factory directors that the Red Army needed this plane like it needed bread. More than 36,000 would eventually roll out of Soviet factories, more than any military aircraft in history. So why did the second seat inside this flying tank become one of the deadliest places a man could sit in the entire Soviet Air Force? 3 years earlier, inside a Moscow design bureau in 1938, the Il-2 had 2 seats. Sergei Ilyushin drew his armored ground attack aircraft with a pilot in front and a gunner behind, watching the tail. Then the prototype flew, and the Mikulin engine could not haul all that steel. Soviet engineers made a trade. They deleted the rear gunner, installed a heavier uprated engine in the freed-up weight budget, and the single-seat Il-2 was cleared for service in early 1941. The empty space behind the pilot was a warning sign. Nobody treated it like one. On June 22, 1941, German tanks crossed the Soviet border, and the new Sturmoviks were thrown at the advancing columns. The first Il-2 offensive mission launched on July 1st along the Berezina River near the city of Bobruisk. German Messerschmitt Bf 109 pilots needed only days to map the aircraft's blind spot. Every gun on the Il-2 faced forward. Approach from behind, settle onto the wooden tail, and the flying tank could not fight back. One regiment lost 10 of its 65 aircraft within its first weeks at the front. Across the Soviet Air Force, Sturmovik squadrons were being hunted from a direction they could not even see, and pilots watched their wingmen fall to attackers who never entered their field of view. The armor was never the problem. The problem was where the armor stopped. What comes next is the part that still doesn't make sense. Instead of waiting for Moscow, Soviet mechanics at Frontline airfields took hacksaws to their own aircraft. Ground crews cut a hole in the fuselage behind the cockpit, bolted a 12.7mm Berezin machine gun onto a crude mount, and put a man in the gap. There was no seat. The gunner sat on a canvas strap slung from wall to wall, with a wire cable behind his back to stop him from falling out of the aircraft. He faced backward, into the propellers of pursuing fighters, holding a gun with fewer than 200 rounds. The Ilyushin Bureau caught up with the Frontline in 1942 when factory-built 2-seat Sturmoviks began rolling off the production lines. But look closely at the specifications, because the numbers tell you exactly who this aircraft was built to protect. The pilot sat inside 12mm of steel plating and 65mm of armored glass. The gunner, 6 feet behind him, got a single 6mm plate that stopped rifle rounds and nothing heavier. That's not a typo, by the way. The man whose entire job was absorbing attacks from German fighters received half the steel, and his legs rested against bare plywood. The arithmetic followed the armor. Roughly 4 gunners died for every Il-2 pilot killed, and some Soviet accounts put the ratio at 7-1. One gunner, Vladimir Mester, said men in his position usually died on their first flight, and only after dozens of missions was there hope of living. The Soviet Air Force opened gunner schools in 1942 and pushed thousands of radio operators, mechanics, and volunteers through crash courses in aerial marksmanship. Some men even arrived in the rear cockpit as a punishment, assigned from Air Force penal squadrons with a promise that 10 survived missions could clear a sentence, a promise the paperwork rarely honored. Most, though, were ordinary trained crewmen who knew exactly what the seat was and climbed in regardless. And still, the gunners made the seat their own. Entire regiments pulled the glass canopies off the rear cockpits, trading several kilometers per hour of airspeed for a wider arc of fire, which, looking back, was either incredibly brave or incredibly stupid. It was also working. But the Luftwaffe's most dangerous hunter was watching the Sturmoviks adapt, and he was nowhere near finished. Not even close. If this story is the kind of history you want more of, subscribe. This channel digs into the machines and the men the textbooks skip. Enter Erich Hartmann, the highest-scoring fighter ace in history with 352 victories. Even he would not waste his guns on the armored shell. Hartmann learned early that rounds fired at the cockpit just bounced off, so he would slide underneath the Il-2 and aim for the oil cooler on its belly, or the seam where the wing met the fuselage. His very first kill, in November 1942, was a Sturmovik downed exactly that way, and more than 60 of his victories would be Il-2s, each one taken by attacking the soft spots instead of the shield. The rear gunners answered with geometry. Soviet squadrons flew 12 aircraft tight together, which meant 12 heavy machine guns covering every tail at once. Over the burning fields of Kursk in July 1943, Sturmovik formations flew a rotating attack pattern their crews called the Circle of Death, diving on German tank columns one after another while the gunners walled off the sky behind them. German fighter pilots learned to fear flying into that concentrated defensive fire because any Messerschmitt that wandered into it rarely flew out. And then the seat that was supposed to be a death sentence started killing aces. The gunners made the one adjustment that changed everything. They learned to hold fire until German fighters committed to their attack run, then meet them with a wall of 12.7mm rounds at close range. In February 1945, Otto Kittel, the fourth highest-scoring fighter pilot who ever lived, with 267 victories, attacked a formation of Il-2s over the Courland pocket. Return fire from a Sturmovik sent him down. The most dangerous seat on the Eastern Front had shot down one of the deadliest men in the sky. By 1944, the lesson was finally written into metal. The Il-2's successor, the Il-10, wrapped the rear gunner in real armor at last, an admission that the trade made in 1940 had cost thousands of men their lives. Around 11,000 Il-2s were lost during the war, and the crews who died in them number in the thousands, gunners disproportionately among them. One veteran gunner remembered climbing into the cockpit for the first time and finding no seat at all, just that canvas strap swinging from side to side like a child's swing, and a machine gun he cared for like a living thing. He climbed in anyway. So did tens of thousands of others, sitting backward, half-armored, 6 feet behind a pilot encased in steel. When a German fighter dove out of the sun from 6 o'clock, its bullets reached the gunner before they ever reached the armored shell. He was the first thing the enemy hit, and the last thing anyone remembers. History kept the flying tank and forgot the man in front of the armor. If you want another story of crews who flew machines that were never built to keep them alive, subscribe. That story is coming next on this channel.